If you could take your seats, we will start the program. Thanks. Hello, my name is Linnea Anderson. On behalf of the First Fridays Committee and the Archives and Special Collections Department, welcome to Hybrid First Fridays, and welcome to both our in-person and online audience members. This season's theme is It's All Fun and Games. We will investigate materials in the archives that are strictly recreational. And today's presentation will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel, so you should be able to access it within the next few weeks. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former library director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the University Library's archives and special collections. A special thank you to Alan and Tammy from Middle English Interpreting, who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentation. And if time allows, we will have a question and answer session at the end. Zoom audience members, if you have a question for our speakers today, you should submit it using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use Q&A and not chat so that we can keep track of your questions. In-person audience, please hold your questions until the end. And after the presentation, there'll be a tour of the storage caverns underneath the library with Kate Dietrich. So without further ado, our presentation today is The Games People Play by Ellen Holt-Werle, Institutional Archivist, and Rebecca Toov, Collections Archivist from the University Archives. Universities and campus life are often viewed as steeped in tradition, but traditions are shaped by the dominant narrative and may not reflect all perspectives. Today's talk is a look at university traditions that shouldn't have been.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Linnea. My name is Rebecca Toov. I use she, her pronouns. I am the collections archivist for the University Archives. I am an alum of the College of Continuing and Professional Studies and have worked as a student employee and professional staff member at the university for the past 15 years. I have brown hair and I am wearing glasses with maroon frames and a black N95 face mask. I am standing at a lectern next to my colleague and co-presenter Ellen, who will introduce herself and our presentation.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Linnea. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Rebecca said, my name is Ellen Holt-Werle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the institutional archivist in University Archives, though I've only been here at the university since September of 2021. So, and as Rebecca did, for accessibility purposes, I'm going to describe myself, and we are also going to describe what's in our slides a little bit better. So I am an Asian American woman with straight black hair. Today I'm wearing a gray black top, and with that, I think we will get started. So within the context of our presentation and talking about traditions, many traditions are tied to physical spaces. So we thought it important to acknowledge that the places we are talking about are on Dakota land, traditional, ancestral, and contemporary Dakota land. Here, where we stand on the West Bank, the University of Minnesota occupies land, Dakota land, impacted by the 1805 and 1851 treaties. If consistency or constancy are a facet of tradition, then we could perhaps point to the tradition of the US government unethically dealing or not upholding any of its treaties with Indigenous peoples. So a statement acknowledging this is not sufficient, though, and should be matched with actions such as supporting American Indian students, staff, faculty, and programs here at the university, or learning about treaties, the land, and Indigenous-led efforts such as back rent or land back. We have included some screenshots of resources here on this slide, including an article about the land the university is on and Indigenous-led organizations working on land issues. At the center of the screen, there's also an image of The 1851 land cessions, if you are not familiar with it, you can see how extensive they were. So in following thinking about place and physical spaces, we thought this map of campus was a good way to situate ourselves in time and space to start our presentation. Many of the things that we'll be talking about happened in these places. This line drawing map is from 1912. You can see University Avenue across the top and buildings that you might be familiar with, such as Falwell Hall, which is also at the top, or Pillsbury Hall, which is slightly below that and to the right. Throughout the university's history, blatant racism, sexism, discrimination, and violence, whether physical or psychological, have occurred in activities, athletics, and the social life of campus. There have also been persistent and ingrained inequities that are much more subtle, though. Those very systemic reasons are why traditions and activities often endured or even still continue to this day. What assumptions, what broader contexts are at the root of things for many years considered benign, or at least considered by a large portion of the university community? For instance, ephemera, cheers, graphics and art, or other imagery were or are widespread across campus, but could be based on stereotypes or cultural appropriation. Even traditional practices like the naming of campus buildings have been long assumed as givens, but can hold much deeper negative impacts. Long-standing activities and traditions, many seen as core to the university experience, to college life, can go unquestioned for years. And while perhaps broader societal changes, groundswells of support from allies, or the very real labor of advocates and activists finally do precipitate change, sometimes this is still too little, too late for people who have tried raising questions for years with no response. In other cases, excuse me, in other cases, some things are still subject to questioning and advocacy. Today, we're going to talk about a few traditions, activities, and other practices here at the university, both past and present. However, we're taking a slightly different tact. We're more interested in raising questions and thinking critically about the broader context of these games and events. We think about this from our perspectives as archivists, not as cheerleaders for the university, nor as historians of the university. As the archivists working in university archives, what are the questions that we receive from patrons? What are the questions that we ask ourselves? How does the information that we're able to find, what's actually contained in our collections or not, how does that influence what people come to know and understand about university history? We do want to note that as we're talking about historical content and using archival materials, our collections do contain harmful imagery, language, such as racist, sexist, or other problematic terminology, images of blackface, and so on, some of which you'll see in this presentation. So to start, Cane Rush. So Cane Rush was a freshman versus sophomore class competition. We first find mentioned in the 1888 Gopher, which was the very first university yearbook. According to the 1895 Book of Athletics and Out-of-Door Sports, the cover of which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, in a chapter on Cane Rush by Malcolm Townsend, it reads, "All athletic sports have in them a certain element of danger. All of them, pushed to extremes, may degenerate into brutality. But the gentleman cannot be a brute. And if but the demands of courtesy and manliness are kept ever in view, no field sport, however exciting, however risky, or however absorbing, need ever pass that borderline that separates chivalry from brutishness. A cane rush could be reduced to a brutal level and become dangerous to the participants. But when planned upon a manly athletic basis and controlled by the spirit of friendly rivalry, It is perhaps one of the most exciting contests adopted by the restless college men. And here men is in quotation marks. So this photo on the left is of Cane Rush in 1906. You can see a group of people at the center with a larger crowd encircling them. So where this takes place is on a field in front of the armory, which you can see in the background, and the building, the corner of which you can see on the right-hand side, is Pillsbury Hall. The church that runs horizontally in front of the armory is now Church Street. So if you're familiar with these places. The goal of the competition was to see which class, the freshmen or the sophomores, ended up with the most hands on the cane at the end of time. Townsend describes the cane as being either an actual cane or a length of wood, quote, about 5 feet in length and from 1.5 inches to 2 inches in diameter, unquote. Although I also found in Minnesota Daily articles mentions of a metal pipe or an old axe handle being used. While it's unclear exactly how the game was played here at the university, Townsend describes 2 teams, freshmen and the sophomores, which included positions of centers, pullers, wrestlers, and jumpers. So gameplay started with 2 centers for each team, so 4 men in total, because of course this was always all men, at the center of the field with all 4 holding onto the cane. And then when the whistle or starter pistol or whatever signal to start the game, then the opposing teams would rush towards the middle of the field. The pullers, their job was to pull opponents from the opposite team out of the pile. And then wrestlers would wrestle them to the ground so they could not go back into the pile. Jumpers were to jump over the crowd to get closer to the center and where the cane was. According to Townsend's description, this gameplay lasted 5 minutes. And at that time, everyone sort of froze, and like an onion, the players were slowly peeled back to see who was left at the middle, actually holding on to the cane. For instance, in a Minnesota Daily article from September 19th, 1900, it mentions the sophomores challenging the freshmen to after chapel and coming out ahead after 2 bouts. Quote, 14 hands for the sophomores to 5 for the freshmen and 16 hands on the cane to the freshmen's 11, unquote. We find mentions of cane rush in yearbooks and student newspapers from 1888 for the next at least 20 years, whether as impromptu events or scheduled even as halftime entertainment at football games. Oops. So here, this photo is from 1908 and shows a large mass of people sort of all focusing on a center point where we assume the cane is. And what you can see here are presumably the jumpers sort of crowd surfing over the top. During a number of years, cane rush competitions also went on to include bouts of wrestling and boxing. In the 2 photos that you can see here on the left, 2 men are boxing in front of sort of a ring of spectators. This photo is of a sparring match after cane rush taken by a C.H. Stewart of the Engineering College, member of the class of 1903. The photo on the right is a different view from a different year of 2 men boxing in the middle of a very large crowd of people. This is from that same 1908 cane rush photo. So if you remember the field with the armory, so this is the same field, but the photo is looking in the exact opposite direction. One thing I found interesting in this photo, you can actually see a few women spectators here. There's a large crowd, including people who appear to be maybe on some kind of wagon or a horse, maybe a vehicle. But you do see a few women spectators at the periphery. This is another photo from that same 1908 cane rush. So despite Townsend's talk of chivalry and gentlemen, I think it's easy to imagine how physical injuries might have occurred. In the November 1895 Ariel, which was the first university student newspaper, the authors took issue with small town Minnesota newspapers describing cane rush as a quote unquote bloody riot. In the 1904 yearbook, the September 1902 annual sophomore freshman battle was described as a quote, conglomerate jumble of human parts, a mass of tangled humanity, unquote. But the freshmen seemed particularly happy, not only because they didn't lose, they tied the sophomores, but that they didn't suffer very many injuries. And only one man required, quote, medical aid to patch his head together, unquote. A September 1904 Minnesota Daily article mentions sophomores attempting an impromptu cane rush, but it being thwarted by upperclassmen to ensure that it happened in the proper way. But the newspaper article goes on to say, quote, an exciting struggle is confidently expected and old timers are looking forward to fights such as used to be when broken heads were the rule and not the exception. So unsurprisingly, cane rush was officially banned in 1912. This Minnesota Daily article from September 20th, 1912, the headline of which reads, annual cane rush to be abolished this fall. The article goes on to say that, quote, according to Dr. Cook of the Department of Physical Instruction, the Faculty Council has decided to abolish the rush and substitute in its stead a less dangerous contest. Minnesota is the last of the larger universities to abandon the cane rush. Each year has brought an increasing number of injuries to the underclassmen participating, and it is believed that another system of determining the strength of the classes is adopted, the scrap will bring out a larger percentage of both freshmen and sophomores and make the contest more representative, unquote. Despite this banning of cane rush, wrestling, boxing, tug of war, pushball, and other similar feats of strength and physical activities continued on as ways for the men of the classes to compete against each other. So it's interesting to think about how this physicality and strength were one of the main markers, not only for class spirit, but as an actual real measure for class rivalry.
The existence and perpetuation of activities such as the cane rush were cultivated during this time period as a result of the physical development of campus infrastructure, as well as the curricular emphasis on the physical development of the health and well-being of students. In 1896, the Armory building was completed. This image is from the September 12, 1896 edition of the Ariel, which included a large photograph of the building and described its features. A main assembly and drill hall with a stage and balcony, lecture rooms, offices, a running track, baths, washrooms, and a locker, gun rack, and artillery room for the military department. Military drill was compulsory for all men during this period and had been required for women up until 1892, when it was replaced with coursework in physical culture. By 1897, all freshman students were required to complete a physical examination and an introductory course in hygiene and exercise. Louise Keel, instructor of physical culture for women, and Louis J. Cook, head of the Department of Physical Education for men, administered the examinations and recommended exercise regimens for each student. On the left is the Student's Manual of Prescription of Exercise and Personal Hygiene, dated 1897, that was issued to students to track their health progress. At the right is an image of the interior page of one of the manuals, which shows some of the measurements that were taken of such things as lung capacity, pulse, and the size and development of muscles. Handwritten in red ink in the remarks section is a note that states, advise practice on prescribed work daily, with the initials LJC for Louis J. Cook. Heel and Cook separately fostered participation in exercise and recreation, organized annual events and contests that demonstrated the strength and skill acquired through training, raised funds through ticket sales to support these activities, and encouraged class competition. This image was taken in the main section of the Armory around 1900. There are 105 men stacked on top of each other's backs in 4 tiers spanning the stretch of the gymnasium floor. Banners hang from the ceiling, bunting is draped across the edge of the balcony, and 2 basketball hoops can be seen, one in the back center attached to the balcony, and another at the very top of the image in the foreground. In 1899, outside the doors of the Armory, on land to the south of the building, the ground was graded and groomed into an athletic field to serve as a new home to the football team and eventually other sports. In the fall of that year, the regents approved a measure to erect a fence to surround the field and build bleachers and a grandstand to accommodate up to 10,000 spectators. This image of the field, which was named Northrop Field after University President Cyrus Northrop, shows the scene at the 1902 football game between Minnesota and Wisconsin. You can see the south side of the Armory in the background and Pillsbury Hall to the left, with the field in the center, bleachers on both sides filled with spectators. A long, tall wooden fence runs along the entire span of the foreground, enclosing the field. On October 17th, 1899, the editorial board of the Ariel student newspaper, which was a weekly publication, put into production a separate daily bulletin titled Football. Editors stated that, quote, "The purpose of the paper is to create enthusiasm in football, to get everybody thinking and talking about it, and so to aid in bringing success to our team." An image of the front page of the first issue is on the left of the screen. The publication included advertisements for the university bookstore, such as the one in the center, which promoted the sale of U of M pennants, ribbon in the university colors of old gold and maroon, and felt and flannel for flags and decorations. Editorials such as the one on the right of the screen addressed how to make football popular, cooperation, colors, optimism, and lung power needed. The author stated, "It must be an interest of the whole body of students and of the faculty as well. It is the unity of sentiment which develops enthusiasm, raises the needed money, hands down a spirit of emulation from class to class, so that finally there is a tradition to live up to." The culture of rooting or cheering was reinforced through the pages of Football, the Ariel, and other publications, such as this football program from 1904, which featured a gopher holding a football illustrated on the cover, and the text of the university yell printed on one of the interior pages. This yell was one of many rhymed chants, cheers, and song lyrics that were printed to aid in the collective expression of school spirit. The university yell can be heard at athletic events today and is also used in branding across the institution. Its origin is unclear. The earliest reference we've been able to find is in the April 28th, 1884 edition of the Ariel, which states, "Ra, ra, ra, sky, you, ma, Minnesota. How is that for college cry? It has not sense, but the meter's immense. We endorse it." The phrase was included in the lyrics written by Floyd Hutzel, winner of a 1909 contest held to name an athletic song for the university, now known as the Minnesota Rouser. An often repeated story found within university publications and secondary sources attributes the origin of this phrase, to a cheer made by Indigenous men participating in a canoe race. This poses questions about cultural appropriation, the creation of myth, and the perpetuation of unsourced origin stories of campus traditions, which can often take on a life of their own. It is important to ask questions and seek out multiple sources to understand the creation and perpetuation of tradition. When I started to ask questions about the growth of athletic activity during this period, I found that a very important question had already been asked by the students themselves. The clipping shown here is from the article titled "Girls Athletics at the U." This was printed in the 1899 women's issue of the Ariel, the cover of which is positioned behind it. Quote, "This has been a year of unprecedented interest and enthusiasm on the part of both faculty and students with regard to our athletics. The maroon and gold has never waved more conspicuously, nor has the slogan of the varsity ever reverberated on campus and field as during the season that has just closed. In the revival of interest and activity in this line of our development, may we suggest to the attention of the world a portion of the student body hitherto unknown in athletics, a non-entity, in fact, namely the girls." So what about the girls? It is important to note that some of the sources I am about to share refer to adult women students at the university by a variety of terms: girls, ladies, co-eds, and women, interchangeably and ubiquitously. It's important to know that when doing keyword searches and in digitized materials or browsing pages of physical documents, I will use the term referenced in the source when referring to it. In 1900, Anna Butner, pictured on the right, was appointed Director of Physical Culture and implemented a curriculum for women that incorporated gymnastic exercise through the use of clubs, barbells, wands, balance beams, and other apparatus, organized teams to compete in interclass tournaments and intercollegiate games, and initiated walking and cycling clubs to encourage outdoor exercise. This article from the April 3rd, 1904 edition of the Minnesota Daily is illustrated with a header of two women holding tennis rackets, standing on opposite sides of a net with the words athletics stressed across it. The article describes the activities of the physical culture program and includes an image of 5 women playing basketball. These images are of pages from the Gopher Student Yearbook depicting the women's basketball teams of 1902 and 1904. Each features the women of the team posed for a formal portrait in uniform. A basketball is placed in the hands of one of the members. The text lists the names of the women and their positions. The activities of these women were regularly covered in the daily newspaper, yet every so often an article appears that hints at the underlying inequity in university athletics. The December 13th, 1904 issue of the Daily stated, "The least prominent of all the departments in the university is that of girls' athletics. Football, baseball, and men's basketball are discussed and are considered college institutions. But the athletic girl, although she is little heard of, plays an important role in university life." During this period, men's athletics was administered by an athletic board of control, which set policies for the use of Northrop Field and the Armory, scheduled athletic contests, set ticket prices, and hired coaches, among other actions. The board was composed of students and faculty representatives, all of whom were men. The illustration on the screen is from the 1900 Gopher Student Yearbook. It depicts an elephant with athletics written on its back, eating from a bin labeled Treasury. A man with board of control on his coat is holding the bin. Men representing the student body, alumni, and faculty, each holding bags with dollar signs on them, are lined up to add to the bin. The caption reads, "And the elephant ate all day." An article from the January 18th, 1907 Daily provides further context to the system of athletic control at the university. Quote, "For the first time in the history of the Board of Control, it will take under its wing the athletic interest of the girls. That is, if it grants the petition of the Girls Tennis Association to take charge of the affairs of that body. Girls' athletics here have always been managed by their supporters, without any outside interference or assistance. There has been a tennis association, members of which paid an entrance fee to aid in laying out a court and keeping it in repair. Men's tennis, on the other hand, comes under direction of the Board of Control, which sees to all matters of preparing courts and generally financing the matter. The girls think they too have right to support." Curious about the assertions made in the newspaper, I reviewed the collection guide for the University of Minnesota athletics records and found 2 ledgers containing the minutes of the Athletic Board of Control, which cover a period of 10 years from 1900 to 1910. An image of one of the ledger covers and an interior page is included on the screen. I reviewed every page of these ledgers to find references to women's athletic activities. In the few instances where a notation referencing girls is found, the action most often recorded was that the matter be laid on the table, or indefinitely laid on the table, effectively set aside without consideration. Regarding the matter of the petition of the Girls Tennis Club in 1907, the minutes show that the board voted to assume the expense of erecting the courts, but then, quote, moved to deny the petition of the girls regarding the Board of Control taking them under its management. The Daily reported on February 7th, 1907, that, quote, "The board did not feel prepared to shoulder all this responsibility at once." The article Review of Girls Athletics, 1908 to 1909, featured in the women's edition of the Minnesota Alumni Weekly magazine from May 10th, 1909, begins with a positive statement. "All girls' athletics at the U are characterized by a sportsmanlike spirit, which is very encouraging." That spirit is evidenced in the photographs, clippings, and other mementos preserved in scrapbooks of the women who participated. Presented on the screen are 2 photographs. On the left, a group of 7 women wearing sweaters and stocking hats, posed together on a sheet of ice. One appears to be holding a hockey stick. On the right, a woman stands on a field holding a ball. Both photographs are undated. The Alumni Weekly article continued, quote, "The girls may be proud of what they have accomplished in the face of various difficulties. For any girl who has ever taken part in athletics at Minnesota knows what discouraging, temper-trying work it is. It is not surprising that under existing circumstances, the great majority of girls take no interest whatever in sports for women. To be forced to do tournament practicing between 5 and 7 at night, because that's the only time the men are not using the big hall. To be driven from the small gym in the middle of practice because the men want it. These things are not conducive to a hearty enthusiasm over athletics. The few who do go in for sports are sadly handicapped by lack of encouragement, cooperation, and most of all, systematic management." The cover of the September 16th, 1909 edition of the Daily presented on the screen included the following headline at the top of the page: "Girls form independent athletic association. Dissatisfied with present arrangement, strike out for selves." The article reported, Athletics for women have an encouraging outlook this year on account of the organization of its devotees into the Women's Athletic Association. This organization will place girls' athletics on a more business-like basis and render participation in the various college sports possible to many more women students. The formation of the Women's Athletic Association is an example of how traditions are formed as the result of collective action to overcome inequities and create opportunities for those that are excluded or under-supported. The image on the screen depicts 10 women strategically posed in acrobatic positions. A woman stands in the center with another woman sitting on her shoulders. Her hands are extended outward, holding the feet of women posed in handstands on either side of her. 2 other women are in the handstand position, and 4 other women are in a push-up position on the floor beside them. The Women's Athletic Association logo, a circle with a gold border with WAA Minnesota written in the center, is in the upper right corner.
So in addition to athletics, there were a variety of other activities and events throughout the university's history that were core to student life. Open houses, parties, circuses, and so on were held to raise money, build community, and recruit new members. Carnivals, large and small, were one activity which seemed to happen really all the time, put on by a wide variety of clubs and residential halls. Campus Carnival was a major event which existed for over 40 years. It became a regular annual event in 1949, initially co-sponsored by Alpha Phi Omega fraternity and the Minnesota Daily to raise money for student scholarships. Campus Carnival consisted of food concessions, games, music, ballyhoo dance lines, which we are going to come back to, and shows with awards and prizes. The screen here shows the cover of the 1951 Campus Carnival program in a black and white sort of diamond geometric pattern. The program inside, 2 views, which you can see on the screen, include opportunities or highlights of the carnival, including a chance to win a Chevy convertible, which you could see pictured here, or other events that were part of the carnival, like the Ugly Man contest. In some years, the winner of the Ugly Man contest won a date with Miss Minnesota. Another image is of the floor plan of the Campus Carnival with a list of all of the different shows put on by the fraternities and sororities, including, for example, Sigma Delta Tau, Ring a Cutie and Win a Beauty, or Alpha Delta Phi and Kappa Alpha Theta's vaudeville show. The carnival would continue to be organized and led primarily by Alpha Phi Omega and other Greek organizations until broader university involvement in the planning through an all-university committee starting in 1958. But even in this 1967 carnival program, which you can see on the screen, it shows it was still a heavily Greek endeavor, with fraternities and sororities sponsoring the majority of the shows, such as Devil's Den by Alpha Epsilon Pi and Alpha Epsilon Phi, or Psychedelic Funhouse by Powell Hall and Delta Kappa Epsilon. On the screen is a bright gold flyer with the Campus Carnival title banner, and then a listing of shows on the inside with a map of where they would take place in the field house. In an April 7th, 1967 university press release, Dean of Students Edmund Williamson points out that, quote, Carney is by far the largest scholarship fund money-raising project undertaken by the students, unquote. Even if you jump forward to the early 1980s, other university press releases and Minnesota Daily articles refer to Campus Carnival as, quote unquote, the nation's largest student-run fundraiser. In the 1970s, fundraising moved beyond just student scholarships to also give donations to groups such as they were called then, the Minnesota Association for Crippled Children and Adults, the American Lung Association, which sent kids with asthma to summer camp, or the Children's Heart Fund. But despite the good intention of raising funds, Campus Carnival was not without its problems. Almost from the very beginning, there were charges of sexism. In this slide here, you see an image on the left from the 1953 Gopher Yearbook. The aforementioned ballyhoo dancers were a mainstay of Campus Carnival. For each group putting on a performance, the shows listed in those previous programs, dancers, who pretty much were all women, would perform to entice carnival goers in to see their organization's show. Planning materials for early years of the carnival even called these come on shows. I think ostensibly because they were meant to get people to come on in to their group's shows, but I think you can also see the double entendre there. So in the image from the 1953 yearbook, you see a woman in silhouette with a crowd of guys looking up at her. The article on the right is from years later, 1979, Minnesota Daily, with the headline, 30-year-old Carney has survived ugly men and charges of sexism. The newspaper article on the right also includes two images, one of a group of women smoking cigarettes who are looking at viewing a show, and then the image on the right-hand side is of one of those ballyhoo dance lines. On the screen are three pages from the 1954 Gopher Yearbook, part of a spread featuring the Campus Carnival. We'd like to direct your attention to two of the images, though. The first, in the middle page, the image on the left is a photo of a woman, but it's taken from an angle sort of looking up. So you see mostly her body and not as much of her face. The caption in the yearbook for that photo reads, "Bump and grind dancer in tight blouse and skirt is an important ingredient of Campus Carnival. Sex was toned down in Carnival, but shows that featured it attracted big and attentive audiences." The other photo that caught our eye appears in the page that is on the far right-hand side of the screen, the image on the left, which is a photo of three students, one of whom is in blackface. The caption in the yearbook reads, "Black-faced performer listens to costumed fellow performer chat with a friend not in the carnival. Every carnival has its quota of burnt charcoal." The sexism of the ballyhoo continued to be brought up, although not the racism of performers in blackface, and other concerns grew as well. There were questions about the Campus Carnival increasing debt and not being able to donate as much or anything to charity due to the cost of the increasingly elaborate skits and shows. But there were also increases in drunkenness, partying, and altercations. Beer sponsorship, such as by Stroh's, was a major component of Campus Carnival, and you can see here in promotional materials featured prominently along with themes such as looking out for children and the key to kids' hearts. These are tickets and posters from, on the left-hand side, 1985 Carnival, and on the right-hand side, the 1988 Carnival. 1988 would actually signal the beginning of the end of Campus Carnival. All of the Greek organizations withdrew their support, saying they would not participate in the 1989 Campus Carnival. Publicly, they cited financial concerns, but the fact that a fraternity member was stabbed 9 times at an after-Carney frat party, I'm sure had to have been part of the consideration as well. Then, in a change of pace, a May 17th, 1990 Minnesota Daily article shared, quote, "Campus Carney, usually an event colored by free-flowing beer and wild parties, took on a more placid tone this year as 5 cows grazed peacefully Tuesday on the lawn of Northrop Mall," unquote. And I really wish I had a picture of that, but Could not find one. In 1990, Campus Carnival changed their sponsor from Stroh's to the American Dairy Association, with promotions for the events even drawing on the Carney's notoriety for drinking. These two ads on the screen appeared in the Minnesota Daily saying, "It just wouldn't be Carney without plenty of party animals," with a cartoon of dancing cows beneath, or "It just wouldn't be Carney without plenty to drink," with a milk carton underneath. The advertising text in both also includes mention of the Carney's new wholesome image. To be clear, we're not bringing Campus Carnival up to be judges or arbiters of good taste or whether activities were appropriate or not, except in the with the exception of blackface, which definitely was not. But were the ballyhoo dance lines, were those sexual exploitation? The women performers planned and put them on, but also how much were they in expectation because they were such a large part of Campus Carnival? Did Campus Carnival cause the drinking and partying and the stabbing? We bring these questions up because this is an example of a tradition where spectacles were part of the activities, but then the spectacles, the ballyhoo dance lines, and the drinking became the event itself. 1990 ended up being the last annual Campus Carnival. A new event called Rites of Spring was started the following year, with organizers saying in Minnesota Daily articles, quote, "Their new event will have less partying than Campus Carney, and during Campus Carney, a lot of money was spent on sets for the skits and the fundraising was almost forgotten," unquote.
So while there has been some progress and changes for the better, though sometimes only incrementally, there have also been traditions that have disappeared, but perhaps served an important purpose. In other instances, change occurred as a result of unforeseen circumstances that required organizations to adapt. How can archives help support and sustain and eventually document and preserve activities and traditions that are important for future generations of students? Throughout this presentation, we have featured pages and made references to the official student newspapers of the university. The Ariel, a weekly paper that was published between 1877 and 1900, and the Minnesota Daily, which succeeded the Ariel as a daily newspaper on May 1st, 1900. University Archives preserves the print editions of both the Ariel and the Daily from the first issues to the last. We could not have anticipated that when we picked up the March 5th, 2020 Daily from the nearest kiosk on campus, pictured on the left of your screen, that it would be the last full issue to be printed. Two stories appear above the fold. Biden wins Minnesota as Sanders wins you, which recounted the results of the 2020 primary election. And you students quarantined due to virus, reported the cancellation of spring study abroad programs, and that 2 students returning from Europe who were exposed to COVID-19 were advised to quarantine. After the pandemic closure in March of 2020, the Daily continued to publish online. And today delivers university news by email to the inboxes of students, faculty, staff, and other subscribers in the Daily Breakdown. The image on the right of the screen is a screenshot of the email as it appeared in my inbox earlier this week. Some may lament this change in tradition, which occurred quietly and without notice, but evidence from the early history of the publication, when it underwent a similar transition in format, suggests that change is often necessary. In the final edition of Ariel, April 28, 1900, the cover and first page of which is highlighted on the screen, the editors recounted the origin of the paper and expressed the following, quote, "There should be no regret that the aerial is no longer to be. Around the name may cling pleasant memories for those who have been closely associated with it as editors. On its pages are written many words that might be reread with profit today. The spirit which gave it birth yet lives and moves and has its being. The daily is but an offspring of it." The words on the pages of these student newspapers can be reread with profit today. Digitized versions of the Arial have been available online for several years. And just a few months ago, quietly and without notice, digitized versions of the Minnesota Daily, covering a period of over 100 years, 1900 through 2009, were uploaded to the University Digital Conservancy, the result of a process over a year and a half in the making. On the left of your screen is the page of the UDC, where you can access over 17,000 issues of the Daily and its supplements. On the right is the first page of the PDF version of the May 1st, 1900 edition.
So to end our presentation, we thought we would leave you on this image of archivists working in university archives when it was in Walter Library. This photo is from 1968 and shows people sitting at desks, someone standing with, as happens in all archives and special collections everywhere, just kind of it's probably not as random, but probably is a random assortment of boxes and other documents and files around. So we've filled this time with mentioning just a few games and traditions, and there are many, many more. But we invite you to think about other traditions, whether here at the university or at any institution that you have attended, that were meant to invoke and increase school spirit and pride. Did these traditions build camaraderie and community? Were they built on foundations of respect and authenticity, or are they contrived and harmful? Previous generations of students have competed, created events, and participated in games to generate school spirit, build community, and create traditions. But these traditions often endure like the game of telephone, where the origin may become obscured, or it's perpetuated through myth, assumption, hearsay, or selective crafting of a narrative that omits negative associations or connotations. As with the few examples that we shared today, such things like physical harm, inequity, exclusion, racism, sexism, sometimes aren't always immediately apparent until we delve deeper, ask questions, and search for broader context. We like to ask these questions of you all to emphasize that this research, the information that we find, is only possible because of our collections, which are here for you all to use. As archivists, we are here to help you navigate, but also to learn from you. Are there traditions, events, things that you foresee coming to an end, or which should come to an end? Were you a part of it or have things that document it? For this presentation, we've relied heavily on materials that were donated by the people involved. Otherwise, that research would not have been possible. We are always uncovering new materials, learning additional information, being asked or coming up with different questions, or rethinking how something has been previously interpreted. Answers aren't always straightforward and are much more nuanced, especially when looking at sources and how information is collected. We still have many, many more questions about myths, legends, and the carrying on of traditions. But to end, we might encourage the start of a new practice of not just accepting traditions, but of asking critical questions and searching for information around games, events, and other aspects which have always just been accepted as part of institutional culture and life. So we'll just add to where if we have time for questions, otherwise we are happy to chat afterwards. We have also put the email up here if you have questions and would like to engage with us that way. And we have also included a link here. So if you're interested in learning more about the collections, the materials that we drew upon for this, you can find those in a document at this link.
Thanks, Ellen and Rebecca. I think we have time for a question. Is there anything either from the online audience or in the room? Oh, there's a right here. Oh,
Not a question. I just want to say this was excellent. Thank you.
Excellent.
Excellent.
We have one question from online. Did Campus Carnival become the Spring Jam?
I don't believe so. I think when we were doing this research, there are so many events that sort of blend together. And I feel like I found an article that said they were trying to incorporate some elements, but that was separate. And also email us to find out more.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the cane rush. And I was wondering if the university had competitions with other universities on that game.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think they competed against other institutions. I think it was for class rivalry within an institution. So always freshmen and sophomores.
But it was done all over the United States?
Yeah. I found a couple pages from a bunch of other universities, both large universities, smaller colleges. I found an article about the University of Chicago having a particularly violent cane rush and that students were possibly going to be expelled because of it. So yeah, it was a tradition, I guess.
Excuse me, did you have it? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can you tell us something about interesting games between the first set, which ended in the early 1900s, up through to where you picked up in the 1950s? What happened in between?
Well, one of the other things that we came across was that there was a university circus. It had animals, it had performances. There are too many to share with you off the top of my head, but email us and we can provide you lots of links to other options.
all right. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for attending today. Thanks to our presenters and our interpreters. If you're interested in a tour, you can meet up with Kate Dietrich in the back of the room. We also invite you to enjoy the Sherlock Holmes exhibit, which is in the gallery across the hall and also on the ground floor inside the Wallen Center. And please join us again online and in person on May 5th for our final presentations of the year on Jewish country clubs from the Upper Midwest Jewish Archives and recreation and leisure through a cartographic lens from the John R. Borchert Map Library. And we will also be having a pizza party to celebrate the end of the season. So thanks very much for attending today. And you can see the presentation on the YouTube channel in a few weeks. Thank you.